Hello again, it's your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, back for another episode of the History Comics podcast, this time with part 2 of The Mad Life of Harvey Kurtzman. When we last left off, Harvey Kurtzman had just finished his stint serving in the Army, and was now ready to go back to fully join in his illustration world. Harvey Kurtzman immediately went back to work for Aviation Press under L.B. Cole, starting with a 6-page Black Venus feature for Centaur Comics number 11 on May of 1946. He also moved in with his mother to take care of her as his stepfather was still in prison, while also paying Fred Oppenheimer's $25 a month for the studio space to work. Kurtzman then went to Timely Comics, the future Marvel, whose editor-in-chief was Stan Lee, and offered to do any kind of work he had available. Kurtzman started with work on some animated cartoons with pigtails, writing and drawing a 6-page story about two pig protagonists called Homer and Hickstaff, Homer being the slow one and Hickstaff being the smaller, smart one. Kurtzman would be paid $180 for the feature in All Surprise Comics number 1 on fall of 1946. The story was full of humor and regularly broke the fourth wall, and while Kurtzman wasn't fond of doing talking animal strips, he was happy to get his foot back in the door at Timely. Impressed, Stan Lee ordered 5 more pigtail strips, with the second feature appearing in Red Movies Courses number 11 in December of 1946. It was called Mountain Climbing. However, Harvey Kurtzman would start to feel the pressure of deadlines, especially as the perfectionism he started to expect in all his work began to emerge. Kurtzman also wanted to move on to magazines and commercial arts, not impressed with comics with low-quality paper and content, but continued because it paid the bills. It was at this time one of his earliest classics appeared as a filler strip, strips meant to complete the page count for the book, which Stan Lee called Hey Look. Lee gave him carte blanche with the strip, which was once again another gag strip featuring a slow big guy and a smart little guy, with this feature first appearing in Joker number 23 on June of 1946. Soon the strip would make Kurtzman popular with both the staffers at Timely and the fans, with many writing Timely for the first time. Kurtzman personally enjoyed the success as well, considering it his own Sunday newspaper strip, even if it appeared in a comic book. Working at Timely also added to his personal life as he met Adele Hasson, a proofreader who worked there. A diminutive brunette at 5'1", she secured her job through a bit of subterfuge by having a friend type the response to Timely for proofreading to position, as Hasson had never proofread before and didn't even know how to type. Hasson was born in the Bronx and had one sister, Doris. She was a bit of a wild child as a teenager, being put into a first-rate all-girls school where she discovered a love for learning. Adele went to the State Teachers College in Cortland, New York. Of note, Hasson and Kurtzman shared the same birthday, October 3rd, though she was 1 year younger. She joined Timely in late 1945, hired by editor Al Suman, who immediately tasked her with proofreading a stack of comic books, which she hated even before she started the job. She would later become best friends with Al Jaffe, who also worked there at the time. Adele would admit to not being a very good proofreader and hated being called out by Stan Lee for her mistakes, resulting in her not enjoying her time in there. She was an early fan of Harvey Kurtzman's work before they even met, as she enjoyed his Hey Look feature and even put in a few votes for it during a contest by the readers. They finally met in person in autumn of 1946 when she was on a date with Will Elder at the M&A Art Show. Kurtzman and Adele hit it off instantly, with Kurtzman impressed by her quick wit, also calling her the funny one in the relationship. In 1946, Harvey Kurtzman made $2,500, $40,000 by today's standards. Not a huge amount of money, but was definitely making a living. He later teamed with Will Elder and Charles Stern to form a studio, calling themselves the Three Musketeers. The studio was located at 24 East 21st Street, called the Charles William Harvey Studio. The loft space was a self-described rat hole, but it had a skylight to provide light for the artist. Kurtzman would learn the business of the comic books on the go, but would never fully grasp it, something that would haunt him his whole career. The artist did take full advantage of the sofa in the studio for admittedly personal reasons. One of the studio's first assignments was creating the press kit of the 1947 film Hollywood Barn Dance for Paramount Pictures. However, when the artists fought over who got to do the cover, they realized every organization needed a boss, as their collective didn't work. Kurtzman would later visit Will Eisner's studio, as like many artists at the time, he was impressed with the spirit. He and Will Eisner would become friendly colleagues, and careers would intersect in various ways over the years. On November of 1947, his studio moved to 1151 Broadway at $80 a month rent. At the time, Kurtzman made $37.50 a page and continued to help his studio mates with commercial projects they were on, but Hey Look remained his own project. Kurtzman would work by first making scribbles of gag strips, using thumbnails to make you aware of the space and time and where to put the dialogue in the word balloons. For his next step, he added the text to flesh out the pictures, and Kurtzman concluded with the inking. One feature that used his method was the Hitty Divine number 25 on February 1948, where Hey Look appeared again for its 54th episode. It was here the characters broke the fourth wall for the first time, speaking directly to the readers, only in a twist, they called the readers the actual cartoons while they were supposed to be the real ones. It was another step in Kurtzman's evolution as a satirist. Kurtzman would have his characters break the fourth wall constantly, continuing to imply the readers were the cartoons in the strips. Hey Look next appeared in Margie number 40 in April of 1948 and Gay Comics number 31 in spring of 1948, the latter of which the characters proceeded to make funny faces and throw pies at the reader before deciding to go off to lunch at the end. Kurtzman would later create the Silver Linings for the New York Herald Tribune, with 9 strips appearing starting in March of 7, 1948. This was thanks to cartoon editor Harold Straubing, who knew Kurtzman from his time at Timely Comics. This would be the closest he ever got to syndication, and also showed that Kurtzman was a slow gag man and more of a satirist, and a gag a day was the format for a daily cartoon. He would later appeal to Walt Kelly in the New York Star, but was rejected, which he would resent, despite being an admirer of Kelly's legendary Pogo strip. Kurtzman would write to Adele frequently and even traveled 215 miles to see her once at one point, and she had left Timely to attend college out of state. He would later meet Joanne Berchtold, a 20-year-old model and actress from Westby, Wisconsin. Kurtzman would write Joanne when she returned to Wisconsin. John Severin later joined the Charles William Harvey studio in the spring of 1948, later became the third man when Charles Stern left, though they kept the name the same as Severin didn't want to change it. Severin would actually depict work in the studio with a normal day at the Chaz Wynn Harvey studio, where Kurtzman was shown at his drawing board, exchanging gunfire with Severin while saying, "Goodbye, old friend." Kurtzman greatly admired the piece and praised Severin's use of inking with pen over brush. Kurtzman would later have it hanging in his living room years later. Severin would also bring Wally Wood to the studio for the first time, though he would later leave to Will Eisner's studio when Kurtzman, who Wood would remember as being nasty to him and called him a kid, recommended he go to Eisner as he was looking for background artists for The Spirit. Wood promptly went there with his portfolio and was hired, launching the career of one of the comic's great artists. Severin would be one of the many artists who would rent space at Charles William Harvey's studio, with others including Robert Cusafe, David Berg, and Frank Dorsey. Adele later returned to New York to attend Hunter College in the Bronx campus. This is where her romance with Kurtzman really began to heat up, even if Berchtold appeared in one of his Hey Look strips. Joanne Berchtold would even meet Adele and remain friends with Harvey, even exchanging Christmas cards with one another long after they were both married. Harvey Kurtzman would start to use psychological protocols for his use in strips. This was inspired by the work in the Army using cartoons that educated and wanted to expand on that. In September of 1946, he even wrote to Dr. Carl Menninger, founder of the Menninger School of Psychiatry in Topeka, Kansas, on the use of pictorial graphics to explain how the mind affected other parts of the body, such as causing ulcers. While this didn't go anywhere, Kurtzman did continue to use educational graphics for other assignments, such as creating a program for the Upholsterers International Union to explain Social Security in 1947. In 1948, he created The Survey, a comic magazine for the juvenile market, to sell ads for Martin Goodman's comics. Kurtzman continued to interest and also led him to attend a symposium at the New York Academy of Medicine on March 19th of 1948. Called The Psychopathy of the Comic Books, which was hosted by Dr. Frederick Warburn. It's where he began his crusade against comic books. Kurtzman would be quoted in a transcript along with Alden Gertz as they represented Timely Comics that comic books should be improved and made more educational. Kurtzman was especially impressed with Charles Burroughs' seminal crime comic, Crime Does Not Pay, and years later recalled reading gave him the same feeling the underground comic movement did 20 years later. All the while, Kurtzman continued to produce Hey Look, appearing in Cindy Comics number 33 in October 1948, and Gay Comics number 34 that same month. This would be part of the last 25 featured this strip, with the last appearing in Willie number 19 of May of 1949. The strip ended due to the decreased page count in comics, thus no more room for fillers. Sadly, Kurtzman was unable to retain any of his original art for Hey Look and was aghast when Stan Lee would draw a giant black X with a grease pencil over each strip once it was photographed for printing, claiming this was done to prevent reprints to rival comics. In the summer of 1948, Harvey Kurtzman married Adele Henson on September 7th in a small civil ceremony. Adele would later claim to not remembering a formal proposal, and Kurtzman just took it for granted they were going to get married. At this time, Kurtzman finally moved out of his family home, anticipating his stepfather Abraham was about to be released from prison, and had got an apartment in Manhattan's Upper West Side near Columbia University on 114th Street. Harvey and Adele traveled to Connecticut to be married in a Justice of the Peace garden, where they noticed the numerous gravestones of his dead dogs. Harry Chester was his best man, while Adele's sister Doris was her maid of honor. The newlyweds would honeymoon in Provincetown, Rhode Island, at the historic Captain Jack's Wharf. Shortly after, Abraham was paroled on October 25th, though the strain on the Kurtzman and his family would remain. While Kurtzman returned to his studio after his honeymoon, he found it a mess with no income as Charles Stern had left for Europe. Plus, with the end of Hey Look, he no longer had a steady income and with a new life to support to boot. Kurtzman immediately got to work for Elliot Kaplan at the Varsity and Parents magazine. While the Varsity assignment wasn't much, this allowed Kurtzman to be exposed to older audiences with features like the Secret Thoughts of an Undergraduate Case Study #1 at the dance. With this, he used the pen name Harvey Harmon, one of his few times Kurtzman ever did so. Elder and Severin later returned to the studio where Kurtzman helped Elder ink a Western story, Prairie Schooner Ahoy, for Prize Comics Westerns #74. At one point, Elder accidentally set the studio on fire when he covered his finger with rubber cement and set it on fire, making it look like his finger was actually on fire. However, when the fire burned through the cement, Elder tried to flick it off, leading to the flames being thrown around the studio, with the fire soon getting so out of hand they had to call the fire department. This made Kurtzman's job of renewing their lease even harder with their landlords, the Rosenblums, but somehow he managed to do so. Kurtzman later worked on Rusty, a ripoff of the strip Blondie for Timely Comics, first appearing in Rusty #20, May of 1949, as a 5-page feature. He produced 60 Rusty pages for $1,700, but was canceled with #22 on September of 1949, which he would call the lowest period of his life as he hated imitating someone else's style. Kurtzman would later say he was a lowly comic book man due to Timely's owner Martin Goodman, who treated artists as tools over people. Plus, being fired from a job Kurtzman felt was beneath him especially hurt. Kurtzman would state he would never do standard comic books like Superman or superheroes in general, and he had to find his own niche. It would be a few years before Harvey Kurtzman finally did so. Kurtzman would also work for Coonan Publishing in 1949, a children's book company. He would design the 3 puzzle books, The Playtime Reader, Lots Takes a Ride, and The Paper Doll, that each sold for 25 cents. Kurtzman was desperate to make more money as Adele liked to spend it, something that would affect their relationship for the rest of their lives. It was at the Coonan that Kurtzman was also collaborate with French artist Renaud Glasconi, who would later return to France where he founded the Pilot magazine, along with co-creating Asterix with artist Albert Uderzo, one of the most popular French-Belgian characters of all time. Kurtzman and Adele greatly enjoyed his friendship and finding him very charming. He would be the first of many European artists who would come through the studio, who was also include Belgian artists like Maurice de Beauvoir, who produced the first Lucky Luke series, and Joseph Guélin, who as Jaffe, created the Segor de Fantiso strip. This would not be surprising for Kurtzman, as he had great appreciation for European artists in general. Kurtzman later sought new avenues for comic books, so he reached out to Dr. Harvey Zorbor, a 52-year-old professor of educational sociology at the New York University. Zorbo sought out ways of using comic books to educate and even join the advisory boards of publishers like Fawcett. Of note, an article for the Family Circle magazine with Mildred Gilman called What You Can Do About Comic Books in February of 1949 that had an opening photograph of children reading Kurtzman's Rusty comic. Kurtzman would call on Dr. Zorbo at New York University discussing the potential for comics to be educational. At one point, Zorbo revealed that he worked for a comic book company that was specialized in that and sent Kurtzman to Educational Comics at 22 Lafayette Street. It was also known as EC, and it was owned by Bill Gaines. Bill Gaines had inherited the company from his father, M.C. Gaines, who was one of the founders of the American comic book medium. At first, the younger Gaines didn't enjoy the business, but when artists like Al Feldstein, Wally Wood, and Johnny Craig joined the company and started to push new comics, Gaines found his groove, which is not in the original direction of his father's educational comics, but instead entertaining comics. Gaines was a good judge of talent, as evidenced by EC's legendary artist staff, and Kurtzman would be no exception. Kurtzman had actually provided comics for EC's before, when he went the offices under the work with Lou Furstein with Kangaroo for Animated Comics #1 in November 1947. When Kurtzman did finally meet with Bill Gaines, he expressed his interest in making educational comics, only to learn that EC was now moving to the entertaining direction. However, since he was there, Kurtzman showed him some Hey-Look strips where both Gaines and Feldstein loved, thus they decided to find a place for EC for him. He would later be paid $10 a page for a Lucky Fight sit-through for a pamphlet at Columbus University to warn about the dangers of syphilis. Kurtzman also provided a 2-page feature, Follow That Girl to Varsity magazine in 1949, and continued to provide the features for the college magazine up until 1951. Despite having never attended college himself, though he did live through the street from Columbia. Kurtzman provided the Pot Shots Pete, a Western filler that appeared in National's All-American Western number 112 on February-March 1950, and Jimmy Walkie, number 4 on March-April 1950. This would be the only work he ever provided for the company that would become DC Comics. At the suggestion of Elliot Kaplan at Toby Press, Kurtzman attempted to adapt Pot Shot Pete into a daily strip, but no syndicate was interested in it. Kurtzman later sold to Toby Press to feature Genius for Al Cap's Lil Abner, number 70 on March of 1950, but only did 9. The strip is about an unruly blonde-headed boy who was always causing mischief, similar to Dennis the Menace, and would appear the following year. However, unlike Dennis, Genius deliberately caused trouble. Of note, the name Genius was a suggestion by Elliot Kaplan, who considered Harvey Kurtzman to be a true genius. Kurtzman would later do 4 children's books for Coonan Publishing: Round the World, Hello Jimmy, The Little Red Car, and The Jolly Jingle. It was good Kurtzman was getting more work, as Adele was pregnant with their first child. Luckily, EC came calling, as they were launching a new line of comic books, and they were looking to shake up the industry. EC Comics under Gaines had decided to venture into horror genre, and Kurtzman would produce a House of Horror feature from a script about 3 frat boys in a haunted house. The feature was just 6 pages, but it contained some amazing art. Gaines loved it and decided to make Kurtzman part of the new horror line, which included Vault of Horror, The Crypt of Terror, Halt of Fear, Weird Science, and Weird Fantasy. Harvey Kurtzman started with Vault of Horror number 12 in February 1950 with Wally Wood, Johnny Craig, and Al Feldstein, with his personal contribution being the Horror in the Night feature. House of Horror would later be made part of the Haunt of Fear in 1950 of May, having been reprinted months later. However, Kurtzman hated working on horror, at least those with a supernatural element, as he like werewolves and vampires. He preferred psychological horror like Madness of Manderville for Crypt of Terror number 18, which would soon be retitled the iconic Tales from the Crypt, in which it tasked readers over who was the insane one in a troubled marriage. Bill Gaines, the head of EC, recognized his talent and put Kurtzman onto Weird Science and Weird Fantasy, where he produced features like Lost in the Microcosm for Weird Science number 12, based on the story He Who Shrank by Henry House, which first appeared in the classic pulp magazine Amazing Stories, August of 1936, about an astronaut who shrinks down only to discover atoms are in fact solar systems themselves. This suited Kurtzman much better, as he was a fan of science fiction, specifically the work of H.G. Wells and Ray Bradbury. A friendly competition soon broke out between the EC artists who were hoping to gain Gaines' favor, which he naturally encouraged. Kurtzman was becoming confident in his abilities and asked to start writing his own scripts, which Gaines and Feldstein felt was happy to oblige, as they were lacking in writers at the time. Of note, Kurtzman was entirely confident as a writer and always relied on his art to help tell the story. He did study short stories to hone his craft and always respected basic structure. Kurtzman soon discovered and developed a writing technique of coming up with the idea first, shapes the story outline when he did the breakdowns for the page and panel layout, before finally settling on a finished script, letting the action and text evolve as he went. Kurtzman especially enjoyed throwing in O. Henry twists, but his perfectionism continued to show with his intense technique, leading to some extraordinary art but rushed deadlines. Kurtzman produced 13 stories for Weird Science and Weird Fantasy that year. His first writer-artist job would be The Island of Death, which appeared in Vault of Horror number 12 in July of 1950, which he based on Richard Connell's The Most Dangerous Game story. Kurtzman would later admit to a little plagiarism here, as he was still finding his footing as a writer. Other stories were The Atom Bomb Thief and Weird Science number 14, which referenced the current events of the then USSR, revealing it had developed an atomic bomb, and Television Terror and Haunt of Fear number 17 that capitalized on the television craze. Thanks to the increased workload and the money that came with it, Harvey Kurtzman was able to move his family into a 2-bedroom sublet from high school friend Frank Dorsey, who was moving to France for a teaching position in the Washington Heights. Home life seemed to improve as well, as Eldell was an excellent cook, and they were able to entertain friends including his work colleagues Will Elder and Harry Chester for dinners. The family finally expanded on July 28, 1950, when their daughter Meredith was born at the New York Doctors Hospital at Upper East Side. Adele suggested the name Meredith after the author George Meredith, whose book she was reading at the time. Kurtzman would be noted to being a devoted father and very much enjoyed being in his children's lives. Despite his workload at EC Comics, Harvey Kurtzman still finds time for other publishers, as his humor strip Egghead doodled for Timely. Over the next 9 months, Harvey Kurtzman would produce 153 strips for EC Comics and Bill Gaines, which amounted to 22 stories, of which he wrote 17. As a writer-artist, Kurtzman spent 1 week to write the story and lay out with the second to finish it. As a result, Kurtzman averaged about 2 stories a month, along with being able to start a third. Plus, he continued to improve as a writer and artist as well, truly coming into his own at EC. Kurtzman still preferred earthbound stories like The Sounds from Another World and World Science number 14, September-October of 1950, which patterned after the Roald Dahl story, The Sound Machine, once again doing a bit of plagiarism, about a man who claims to have invented a device that can hear the screams of plants. Another story, The Radioactive Child, in Word Science number 15, about a child who was exposed to radiation and becomes super intelligent. The Last War on Earth, for Word Science number 16, explored a professor trying to find a cure to war. For The Giggling Killer, on the crime suspense stories, the last for that comic, Kurtzman showed his knack for hand-lettering captions and word balloons to help expand the story, which was needed, as many don't consider this to be one of Kurtzman's best. This was against Bill Gaines' use of the Leroy lettering system for EC Comics, which gave them a uniform look, but Kurtzman hated it. Gaines actually understood this, as Kurtzman was using his lettering to help fill in stories visually. As a result, many of the Kurtzman stories had a few words, but ones that he used carried impact. Eventually, Ben Oda, a Japanese-American World War II veteran, was hired as an EC letterer. He would go on to have a successful career lettering countless comic strips and books for the next 40 years, and would posthumously be inducted into the Harvey's Hall of Fame in 2019, with former DC president and publisher Paul Levitz speaking on his behalf. Another story was Man and Superman in Word Science number 6 of April of 1951, about a bodybuilder who tries to use science to improve his physique through horrifying results. It was followed by Gregory Had a Model in Word Science number 7 about a man who believes his car is human. This would be considered another classic by Kurtzman, but he was already wanting to move away from horror and science fiction stories, along with feeling the gore used in them was a bit excessive. Plus, Kurtzman doesn't want to write and draw comics, he also wanted to edit. He would soon get his own comic book to do just that. And with that, we will conclude with this part in the life of the Harvey Kurtzman. Join me again next week as Harvey Kurtzman does indeed move on to editing and continues to reshape the comic book world.
Than a New Day pancake. More fun than a super kick party. It's the wrestling podcast from the host, who is the hammer swinging, burrito eating, well, you know the rest, of Thunder Talk. Sexy Thor. It's the Ring of Thunder, found in the Thunderverse and among the great podcasts of the ESO network.
And now is February 27th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. Absolute Wonder Woman, number 5 by Kelly Thompson and Hayden Sherman, that sees Wonder Woman Diana finally finding a way to take down the Tetracide in a unique way to this absolute universe, while her friend Steve Trevor shows this what his purpose is in the whole storyline. This is another great story by Thompson that really shows how this Wonder Woman is both different and the same as the Diana from the regular DC universe, and that she's still a hero through and through, but she has a unique way to take on this giant monster, and it's a very cool way to harkens back to the old Greek origin stories, so that's a very cool twist on that situation. And plus, Thompson also shows what Steve Trevor's purpose is in the whole Wonder Woman storyline, and that how does this normal human being stand with this, basically who's a goddess fighting the world, and you find out Steve Trevor's Sherman's job is to save her while she saves the world. It's a perfect complementation. Also, it's nice harkening back to that great scene in the 2017 live-action movie that really one of the best jobs of solidifying their relationship in that movie as well, and why it carries over so well in the comic books. And all that is masked gorgeously by Sherman's art, which is not this great, gorgeous action with the Tetracide still being this monstrous creation, and also the cool twist that Diana does to take him down. But also, it should be pointed out, other people have pointed out too, that Wonder Woman is drawn very Greek-looking, which is nice. Consider, well, she is Greek. She's a Greek goddess, an Amazon, so she should look Greek. But Sherman really does a great job emphasizing those traits, and it's a very nice touch to her overall character. And all in all, this is just another example of why this is absolutely lines one of the best thing DC Comics has been putting out in years. Pick them all up, and definitely this one. And of course, I'm curious if people, some who pay attention to this series, are going like, wait, you didn't read Ultimate Spider-Man number 14? Well, I tried to, but I had to work a little late, and when I finally got to my comic book store, it is sold out. Yeah, that's amazing. 14 issues in, and this book is still selling out. I heard it's fantastic and amazing. More amazing than, well, the actual Amazing Spider-Man, which, by the way, lots of those books in the stands still at my comic book store, but who want to buy that? Yeah, so yeah, you'll probably hear me give me a review for Ultimate Spider-Man next week when some more issues come in, or the notable reprint, because that book's just still awesome, but there's still plenty of other books in the stand, like Absolute Wonder Woman. So, till then, join me again next week for the third part of the life of the great Harvey Kurtzman. But until then, go ahead and enjoy your comic book, and definitely check out Absolute Wonder Woman, because that is, one of the best comic books in the stands right now.